Well, it's basically a presentation on the potential of looking at spiders in cave from a functional perspective. Just some ideas that I collected here. And basically, this is a collective effort to extract traits for all these species by all these people listed in this first slide. I think we arachnologists are very proud of our model organism, right? Because we can write that they colonize all kind of habitat from the highest peaks down to the hottest desert, and some species even the aquatic environment, such as Daisies marina, which inhabit the intertidal zone. But what really fascinates me is the diversity of spiders that have adapted to the underground world, to caves and other subterranean habitat. A few years ago, we tried to summarize the information we have in this review, Spiders in Caves, and we could see that there should be more or less 1,000 or more ILS species in 48 families, plus a countless number of species associated with cave in other ways. But this is very rough estimation. Whereas we have better data, better resolution for Europe, where we know that there are currently 500-ish species in caves out of 5,000, which means about 10%. And all these species too became subterranean adapted. They have evolved a number of morphology and peculiar adaptation, which I will call traits. And the most obvious one probably are the lack of eyes and the depigmentation, which are widespread across all species, as emphasized by this first description of a subterranean spider, this Stalita teniaria. And the descriptor wrote that the species have oculi nulli, meaning no eyes, and an abdomen niveo, meaning a snow-colored abdomen due to depigmentation. But of course, adaptation can be more subtle. For example, we know that in response to the lack of food in most caves, there is a general change in the metabolism, and some evidence on this Telema tenella based on laboratory experiments showed that the species, for example, can live up to 16 years and have reduced the number of eggs in the cocoon to an average of 4. And some individuals just lay one single egg, which is, I think, a dramatic departure compared to the typical surface dwelling species, the lifestyle of a typical surface spider. And more, there can be modification in silk property due to the high relative humidity of the cave atmosphere, and so on and so forth. And all these different traits and adaptation enable these cave species to occupy different niches within a typical cave, implying that a community is often, even if these communities are very poor in species, there can be many species coexisting underground and avoiding competition due to spatial and temporal differentiation of the niche. And what we are trying to do is to study this simplified system to try to answer general ecological questions. And we recently won a project, Pedro Cardoso and myself, which is really about using cave spiders to test macroecological theory. And we can do so because we recently gained a lot of data, especially in terms of distribution and community composition. This database that we made available very recently, for example, lists more than 500 caves, all scattered across Europe, where we know the community composition and we know some of the environmental feature at the local scale, which we can use to explore broad taxonomical pattern and community composition processes. But what we are trying to do now, and this is the core of this talk, is to add a second layer of information, try to collect functional traits for all these species. And which means, first of all, taking some simple morphological traits like the regression of eyes, the elongation of the leg, the depigmentation, but also other traits like the type of web and the diet and the position occupied by each species in a cave. And all these traits allow us to explore more mechanistic questions, to go deeper understanding macroecological pattern. One example of question which we have tackled with traits, but just with a small selection of species in the genus Troglodyphantes, is to try to characterize the trait space in a multidimensional space that the species occupy. And this allows us to explore competition dynamics among the species. And besides that, allow us to quantify in a quantitative way the degree of subterranean adaptation of each species, which is very interesting because we can try to move forward and get rid of all these ecological categories like troglobiont, hypogeo, biomorph, that have been populating the literature in caves for 200 years, and which create often artificial demarcation and a lot of heated semantic and etymological debates, such as in this hypothetical case where three speleologists are arguing how to classify this whitish and blind salamander. From a more macroecological perspective, we can, for example, try to understand how functional diversity varies through time, through space or time. As we know, basically, if you take two caves and you increase the distance between these, you will find that all species in a cave are suddenly replaced by other taxonomically different species. This is because there is very low dispersal potential in cave spiders. But if we look at traits, we don't really know if these species that are replacing other in the community fulfill the same or different functional role. It may be that they replace the species, but they are all the same. And this would, we would have, for example, a very different curve in this case, but we really don't know because we are still collecting the data. And these are just example of questions, and there can be so many other. But what my message here is that this simplified system that have few species, very low variation in all the abiotic condition, and few interaction among species are very simple to describe, and pattern that we can detect here can be often very, very clear and not at all blurry as in the case of more complex surface system. So maybe this question can also be used and transferred to other contexts once we contextualize them. And basically, I realized that this talk is very Europeocentric. But in the future, I will really see a good endeavor would be to try to simply screen the literature and identify all the species associated in cave outside Europe, and especially in the neotropics where we have very little knowledge, but where new species are being described at a very, very high rate. And while we do so, we can use this template we have developed for Europe to extract traits that are comparable across the tree of life, basically. And with that, we can try to finally describe some global diversity pattern in subterranean spider. And basically, this will be particularly new because we don't know any pattern as such in any group in caves, not only spider. So the underlying message is that if anyone is interested in subterranean biology, or even just a single family of spider with many cave representative, it would be nice to get in touch and start to think in this direction. And with that, I have finished, and I thank you very much for your attention and for organizing this terrific conference. I was skeptical about online meeting before joining this, and I'm really having a great time. Thanks.